Uh, Hello, everyone. So, in this episode, which is episode number 10, we're going to discuss the macroeconomic fundamental indicators and the macroeconomic news calendar. Okay. So, let me start by reading the document first so that you can get a clear idea so that I can also get an outline of what to teach. Okay. So, macroeconomic fundamental indicators are the key economic data points that provide insight into the overall health and performance of a country's economy. Okay. So what does the macroeconomic fundamental indicators do? Macroeconomic fundamental indicators are the major or key or important economic data points that provides the insight or that gives the idea about the overall health and performance of the country's economy. Okay, these indicators are closely monitored by the forex traders as they can significantly impact currency prices or the commodity prices. Here are some of the main macroeconomic fundamental indicators that drive the forex market. Okay, and these macroeconomic fundamental indicators are gross domestic product, GDP, employment data, indicators, interest rates, trade balance, retail sales, central bank policy decisions. Okay. So these are the macroeconomic fundamental indicators. Okay. Now GDP. GDP measures the total value of all goods and services provided within a country's borders. It is a broad indicator of economic activity and growth. Okay. So GDP is actually the total value of goods and services produced within a country. Okay. It is a broad indicator of economic activity and growth. Employment data. Employment data. This includes indicators such as non-farm payrolls, NFP, unemployment rate, and jobless claims. Okay. Employment data provides insight into labor's market health and can influence consumer spending and overall economic growth. Okay. For example, let me show you on the whiteboard here. So we have several fundamental macroeconomic indicators. Okay. So what are the fundamentals macroeconomic indicators? All right. So these are the key economic data that provides idea or insights into okay. So key economic data that provides ideal idea or insights into the overall economic health of the country. Okay. And there are many kinds of economic data. Okay. So these data are, first of all, GDP. So what is GDP? The GDP stands for gross domestic product. Okay. GDP stands for gross domestic product. All right. And what does the GDP shows you? The GDP shows you the total value of goods and services produced by the country. Okay. And these may be, okay, what are the total value of goods and services? So I'm going to give you example of goods and services. For example, secondary manufacturing, okay? Processing of raw products, okay? And number third is tertiary services. Okay. So these are the, so these are the examples of the goods and services produced by the country. For example, the processing of raw data. For example, a country grows up the wheat, okay, or the country grows up the plant, and then like a cotton plant or cotton bud, then they process the cotton plant into a cotton. Okay, so this is the manufacturing of raw data, and or let's say, for example, the country has a oil. Okay, the country digs out the oil or extracts the oil, okay, and then refine it and then sells it. Okay, so this is the processing of raw materials and natural resources. Okay, secondary manufacturing is the manufacturing that occurs in the industry. For example, the country is producing a cement, or the country is producing different kind of products. Okay, okay. For example, let's suppose the country is producing PVC, the country is producing rubber, the country is it's actually processing let's suppose plastics. Okay, so or the ceramics items or steel items. Okay, so these kind of manufacturing is known as secondary manufacturing. So the third one is the tertiary services. Tertiary services is like the hotel services, tourism services, okay, or restaurant services, or you can say uh, shopping malls, commercial activities, okay, or the or the commercial shops. These are the kind of the tertiary services. So the total value of goods and services produced by the country is known as GDP. This is not a company, it should be country. Sorry, my mistake here. So the total service value of goods and services. Okay. All right. So in the treasury services, okay, I've already listed examples like hotel management, tourism industry, or the tourism services, commercial activities, okay, like shopping malls or commercial shops, okay. All right. And the services like IT sector services, like like production of softwares or the hardware tools. So these are all the tertiary sector services. All right. Or the services like e-commerce. Okay. So whatever activities that produces goods and services in a country, when we add them together, it will give us the total value of that goods and services produced by the company. That total value of goods and services produced by the country is known as the GDP. Okay. So I hope you got an idea about GDP. Now let me see the next one. The next one is the employment data. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to the whiteboard and I'm gonna remove it GDP. And I'm gonna write here employment data. Employment data includes like unemployment reports. Okay. Employment reports or we can say, okay, so they are measuring the unemployment reports and the employment reports. Unemployment reports states how many people in the country are unemployed. Okay, employment reports suggest that how many people in the country are employed. Okay, what percentage of the people or the population in the country is employed. It is reflected in the employment reports. Okay, we have we also call it as the job reports. Okay, and then we also have, let's suppose, jobless reports. Okay, the example of job reports or employment data is the non-farm payroll, NFP. It is known as non-farm payroll. It is an example. Remember that there are various kind of job reports. So non-farm payroll is just an example of it. Okay. So in the non-farm payroll, what happens that non-farm payroll is a payroll or payroll means a job report. So non-farm payroll is actually a job report that is non-farm, that is actually extracted from the non-farm activities. Non-farm activities means excluding plantation and agriculture activities. All right. So NFP means non-farm payroll. Non-farm payroll means reports. So non-farm job reports. Okay. So payroll means a job report. So non-farm payroll or non-farm job report means it the job report of everything excluding plantation and agriculture activities. It does not include plantation, okay, or agriculture activities. All right. So what is the significance of employment reports and the unemployment reports? All right. The significance of employment reports and unemployment reports is that it affects consumer spending. Okay. Consumer spending. Okay. So let me give an example here. If the unemployment rate is high and employment rate is low, then the consumer spending will be less. Okay. So let's say, for example, if in a country the unemployment rate is high, and the employment rate is low, it means that most of the people are unemployed and very few people are employed. Then what will happen? That then then what will happen? That the consumer spending will be less. A consumer will only buy the uh, necessary aspects of life, or they will only buy the necessary items of life. Okay, they will not spend a lot of money. Okay, they will not do extravagant or lavish shopping. Okay, they will not buy extravagant or lavish products. Okay, they're gonna save money because they have to survive the unemployment. Okay, so if the unemployment rate is high and the employment rate is low, then the consumer spending will be less. Remember, the consumer spending, whatever the consumer spend, consumer means the people. Okay, the people living in a country are the consumer. They will spend less and less money, and they will buy only the necessary items. They will not buy the extra items. Okay, so the spending will be less. And when the consumer spending will be less, then the economy will be weaker. Okay, when the consumer spending is less, then the economy will be weaker. Now let's suppose another situation. If the unemployment rate is low and the employment rate is high, then the consumer spending will be more. Okay, it's and the economy will be stronger. Okay, so if the unemployment rate is low and the employment rate is high, then what will happen that the people or the consumer living in a country, they will have extra money, they will have abundance of money, they will have more money. So obviously they're gonna spend more, they're gonna buy more things, they're gonna shop for more items. Okay, and the consumer spending will increase, and this will make the economy stronger. Now how this makes the economy stronger? Okay, for example, so when people buy more, what happens that the country administration or the government, they get more money from the people in terms of taxes. And even the sellers who are selling items to the consumers, they also get good amount of money, and so that they can produce extra amount of products, they can produce more services, they can produce more goods. Okay, in this way the economy will become stronger. All right. So you have to remember this. Okay. All right. Now let's go back to the to our document here and read about other things. Inflation indicators. Okay. Inflation indicators. Measures of inflation such as consumer price index and the producer price index tracks the changes in price of goods and services. Central banks closely monitor inflation as it affects the monetary policy decisions. Okay. So the third one is the inflation indicators. So, okay, inflation indicators. All right. And what does the inflation indicators measure? The inflation indicators measure inflation. Okay. Inflation indicators measure what? It measures inflation. Remember, inflation is, now what does inflation means? Inflation means that how expensive the price of goods and services are. How expensive price of goods and services are. Okay. Inflation means how expensive the price of goods or services are. Okay. So when there is a inflation, or when there is a high inflation, so what happens that the price of the good and services will be high. Okay, the things will be more expensive. Whatever services or whatever goods or products you buy from the market or from the shopping mall or from the shops, they will be more and more expensive. Even the services you get, they will also be more expensive. Okay, so inflation suggests how expensive the price of goods and services are. Okay. And there are two kind of inflation indicators. Number one is PPI and CPI. Number one is PPI. Number second is CPI. Okay. PPI stands for Producer Price Index. CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. It's very simple. Now, what does the CPI and PPI do? What kind of these indicators do? Okay. So I'm going to write it down here. PPI and CPI track changes in the prices of goods and services. All right. So PPI, so the PPI and CPI track changes in the prices of goods and services. Okay. All right. So it's very simple. So in normal terms, okay, just think about it. Okay. When the inflation is high, when the PPI index or the CPI index is giving us the high reading or high count, it means that the inflation in the country is high. Okay, when the value of CPI is high, then the inflation is high. When the value of the PPI is high, then the inflation is high. When the value of the CPI is low, then inflation is also lower. When the value of the PPI is lower, then the inflation is also lower. So PPI and CPI track the changes in the prices of goods and services. They track the inflation, okay, whether things or whether prices of goods, services, and products are more expensive or less expensive. So what happens when the inflation increases? When the inflation increases, okay, so what will happen? During high inflation, consumer spending decreases. Okay. Whenever the inflation is high, then the consumer spending will reduce. Why? Because the prices of the product are too expensive that the people want to save money, so they will not buy expensive products, obviously. So when the inflation is high, then the consumer spending will decrease. Okay. Similarly, during low inflation, consumer spending increases. Okay. So during the time of low inflation, consumer spending will increase. Why? Because the price of the goods and services or the products will be cheap. Okay, so that's why the people will be encouraged or the people will be motivated to buy more and more products. Or that's why the consumer spending will increase. And when the consumer spending will increase, the government will get more taxes. And government will go get more taxes. All right. And even sellers or producers will get good cash flow. Okay. So even the seller or producers will get good cash flow. And when they get good cash flow, what will happen? They will produce more. And obviously, when they produce more products or more goods or services, so what will happen? High job rates. Okay, the job rates or the employment will go high, because when a company or when a seller or producer, they get good cash flow, they will produce more goods and services. And when they produce more goods and services, they need to hire extra people. And when they need to hire extra people, the employment rate goes up. And when the employment rate goes up, then the economy of the country improves. Okay, that's it. I hope you get the point. Now, I'm gonna go to the interest rates. So, interest rate is the occurs when the central bank set interest rates. Okay, so interest rates are always set by the central bank of the country. So, just for example, the central bank of Pakistan is the State Bank of Pakistan. The central bank of India is the Reserve Bank of India. The central bank of Malaysia is I'm not sure about the Central Bank of Malaysia. Okay, but you can research online. Okay, the Central Bank of UK is the Bank of England, and the Central Bank of US is the Federal Reserve. So these central banks are responsible for setting the interest rates, which impact borrowing cost, investment decisions, and currency valuations. So interest rates are very important economic indicator or fundamental economic indicator. Okay. Changes in the interest rates or monetary policy statements can have a significant impact on a currency prices. Okay. So it's very simple. Let me remove it. Okay. Now we have interest rates. Okay. So interest rate, you can even Google it. So interest rate is the borrowing rate. Okay. When you borrow money from the bank, you get an interest rate. You have to pay extra to the bank when you repay your debt. Okay, or when you repay your loan, or when you take a loan from the bank or other financial institutions, you are charged with the interest rate. Okay, you have to return back the principal capital, and also you have to give the interest on it, on your borrowed capital, and return it back or pay it back to the bank. In the same way, when you deposit money into the bank will borrow your money. The bank will take or use your money. And in exchange, after some period of time, the bank gonna return your money, or your principal amount, or they will credit your principal amount back to your bank account. Okay, and they will also pay you the interest rate. Okay, so there are two ways. Number one, when you take a loan, okay, when you take a loan from bank, then you have to repay the principal amount plus interest amount charge on it back to the bank. Okay. So when you take a loan from the bank, then you have to repay the principal amount which you take from the bank, and you also have to give the interest amount which is charged by the bank according to the interest rate, and you have to pay this entire amount back to the bank. Okay. In the same way, when bank uses customer deposits and make investments, then bank is liable to pay back the principal amount credit back the principal amount back to the customers, back to the clients, and also pay interest on it. Okay. So what happens that when the bank uses customer deposits and makes some external investments, then the bank is liable to credit back the principal amount back to the clients to their bank account, and they will also pay interest, additional interest on top of the principal amount. Okay, they will also credit the interest, okay, to the customers. All right. So what happens? When the interest rate is high, so in these two situations, what happens when the interest rate is high, then people needs to repay extra or high amount of money or high amount of interest back to the bank. So when the interest rate is high, so when the interest rate is high, then the people borrow less from the bank. Why they borrow less from the bank? They borrow less from the bank because they have to pay the high interest rate on top of the principal amount. So they borrow less money from the bank. Okay, or they borrow less, or they don't borrow any money from the bank, depend on the situation. But this happens when interest rate is high. High interest rate. Okay. When the interest rate is high, and when the interest rate is low, then what happens? So what happens? When the interest rate is low, then the people borrow more money from the bank. Okay. They borrow more money from the bank because they have to pay less interest over on their principal amount or on their principal loan amount. Okay. In the same way, when, oh, sorry, on the flip side, when the interest rate is high, then people borrow less money from the bank, or the people borrow less from the bank because they have to pay high amount of interest on their principal amount or their principal borrowed amount. That's why they are not motivated to take more and more loans from the bank. In the same way, when the interest rate is high, okay, the people do another thing. So when the interest rate is high, then people credit more money. The people credit more money into their bank account due to greed of getting higher interest from the bank. So it's very simple to understand. When the interest rate is high, then people take less and less loan from the bank because they are charged higher interest by the bank, and they have to pay higher interest amount on top of their principal borrowed amount to the bank. So they are discouraged to take less and less loan from the bank. And at the same time, because the interest rate is high, the people are encouraged or motivated to deposit or credit more money into their bank account due to greed of getting higher interest from the bank. Okay, so when they have the greed of getting higher interest from the bank, they're gonna deposit more and more money into their bank account. So everything in the financial market is driven by fear and greed. Here the fear and greed plays a lot of role. Okay, the people have the fear that they have to pay higher interest to the bank when they borrow money during the times when the interest rate is high. At the same time, they are encouraged to invest or deposit or credit more and more money into their bank account in an attempt to get higher interest from the bank. So this is driven by greed and this is driven by fear. Okay. Now, when the interest rate is low, people people borrow more money from the bank, okay, because they have to pay less interest to the bank on their principal borrowed amount. That's why the people take more and more loan from the bank, okay, or the people borrow more from the bank when the interest rate is low. Or at the same time, the people credit less money into their bank account when interest rate is low, okay, because they will they will get less returns or interest on their deposits. So when the interest rate is low, the people will borrow more from the bank, okay, because they have to pay less money in the form of interest on their borrowed capital back to the bank. Okay. In the same way, okay, on the other side, the people during the times when the interest rate is low, the people will credit less money or deposit less money into their bank account when the interest rate is low, because they will get less returns or interest on their profits. So there they don't have any interest. They have a lack of interest. And when the they sorry, the clients or the people have they have the lack of interest when the interest rate is low, and they are discouraged, or they don't have the confidence to credit more money into their bank account or to deposit more money to their bank account. Okay, they credit less money or deposit more, or sorry, and deposit less money into the bank account when the interest rate is low. In the same way, when the interest rate is low, then the people will also borrow more money from the bank, because they have to pay less interest rate to the bank charged on their borrowed capital, okay, or on their principal capital. Okay, so that's all about the interest rate. Okay, so we're gonna finish this episode here, and in the next episode we're gonna cover the other parts of the macroeconomic indicators. Okay, so the final way, or the final touch up, I'm gonna give you the formula for interest rate. Okay, interest rate formula is principal amount plus Okay, so here's the formula. Total amount is equals to the principal amount plus the interest rate charge on the principal amount. Let me give an example here. Let's suppose, okay, and we can also write down in simple terms. A is equals to principal amount plus interest. Okay, amount or total amount is equals to the principal amount. So principal amount is also known as the borrowed capital or borrowed amount. Okay. So total amount is equals to principal amount or borrowed amount plus interest charge on the principal uh, charge on the principal amount or borrowed amount. All right. So this is a formula for the interest. So let's suppose you borrow $100 from bank. What you did, you borrow. Okay, you borrow $100 from the bank. Okay, all right. And when you borrow $100 from the bank, the interest rate, we call it as IR, interest rate is equals to, let's suppose, 3%. Okay, interest rate is 3%. So what is the total amount which you have to pay back to the bank? We have to find down the total amount which we have to pay back to the bank. So it's very simple. We're going to put this into formula. First of all, we're going to find out the interest rate charge on the capital, which is I. It's very simple. What we're gonna do, we're gonna take 3% of multiply by principal amount. Okay, the principal amount is 100. So the answer is 3. So 3 is the interest amount. 3 is what? 3 is the interest rate charged on the principal amount. All right, 3. And now what we're going to do, we have amount is equals to what is the total amount which we need to pay back to the bank. Okay, so the you took $100 loan from the bank. Okay, and the interest rate charged on you is 3. So you have to pay back $103 back to the bank. Okay. In the same way, let's suppose now let's suppose the bank borrow $100 from the client's deposits and the interest rate, okay, interest rate is equals to 3%. Okay, now we have to find out the total amount which the bank will credit back to the customer's to the customer's bank account or the client's bank account. So we have to find out the amount. All right, how to find it? It's very simple. First of all, we're gonna find out the interest rate charged on the principal amount. Okay, so you know that the principal amount is $100. So this is the amount which the bank borrow from the client's deposit. Okay, and this will be multiplied by the interest rate. The interest rate is 3%. Okay, so the interest rate is 3%. The answer would be the answer would be 3. So 3 is what? The answer is 3. Now 3 is what? 3 is I. This I, interest. Now what we're gonna do next? We're gonna add, okay, the amount will be equals to the principal amount which the bank borrow from the client deposit was 100. So we're gonna put 100 into this formula. A is equals to 100 plus the interest charged on the borrowed capital, which is 3. So the answer would be 103. All right, so I hope you have understood the idea of the interest rates and everything. You have also understood about the idea about the unemployment reports, okay, or the employment reports, and even the GDP. Okay, so it's very, very simple to understand. Okay. Now, one thing I missed out in my previous session here, or in my previously, what I missed out is that GDP, okay, when the GDP is high, okay, when the GDP is high, then country will produce more goods and services. So the total value or amount of goods and services will increase. So the point is, whenever the country produces more goods and services, so the total amount of goods and services, or the total value of the goods and services, will increase, and this will lead to the high GDP. So whenever there is high GDP, then there will be high economic growth in the country. Okay, you have to remember this. So I explain this again. Whenever the country produces more goods and services, then the total value or the amount of goods and services produced by the country will increase, and this will lead to the high GDP. And whenever there is a high GDP, then there will be high economic growth in the country. And whenever there is a high economic growth in the country, then the economic health of the country will increase. Okay, it's very simple to understand. Now, on the flip side, when country produces less goods and services, so the total value, let me put down then the total value or the amount of good or services will decrease. Okay, whenever the total value or the amount of goods and services will decrease, then there will be low GDP. Whenever there will be low GDP, then there will be low economic growth in the country. Okay, and the low economic growth in the country will lead to the to the situation where the economic health of the country will decrease. That's it. Okay. So these are, you just have to conceptually visualize everything. Okay. Whatever I have told you in terms of the concepts, you have to visualize them, and you have to understand in the real-time situation. So try to do Google search if you are not clear by now about these terms. Okay. And in this way, you're gonna get more and more information, okay, and more knowledge about the fundamental indicators or the fundamental macroeconomic indicators. All right. So this is episode number 10, part 1. In the next episode, which would be episode number 10, part 2, we're gonna cover trade balance, retail sales, central bank policy decisions. Okay. And we also gonna study about the macroeconomic news events and the macroeconomic news calendar. Okay. So we're going to discuss these things, and we're going to complete this section. Okay.